Well, good morning again. I'm back. That fast, actually. I want to just welcome you to this place, and I hope you know that when I say those words welcome, I truly am just a bearer of that. Like I get to extend that from who God is. God welcomes each and every person to this place, just as you are here this morning. We're so glad that you're with us. Our vision at St. Paul's United Methodist Church is to be a community that loves like Jesus. We believe that when we live that out and we love our community, people respond to it. And so that is the message that we want to promote. It sounds simple, but it's really hard to do in practice. And so we do that together as a community. This last week, I found myself engrossed in a poem by Robert Frost. It's a poem called The Road Not Traveled. Has anyone read that poem before? It's kind of popular this time of year, especially at graduations, and you might hear it at business conferences, some of those types of things. They typically only quote the last line of the poem, which I'm sure you've heard before. It goes like this: two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. And that is an iconic line. You've heard that before, yes? That line from Robert Frost. And it's meant to really inspire us and spur us on to blaze our own trail or carve out our own path or claim maybe even our uniqueness and take a risk and take the road that maybe other people were unwilling to take. And I think there's value in understanding it that way. But if you actually read the entire poem, has anyone read the entire poem? And poetry is one of those things, it's hard to understand, I think. At first, you have to read it and then just sit with it for a while. It has to marinate. So that's what I was doing this week. The poem, you may be surprised to know, is actually not about a road that is less traveled. That is not what it's about. So this poem, I'm going to share a little bit about it. It was actually written by Robert Frost about a friend of his, and he and this friend would go and take walks in the woods. This is what they would do together to pass the time. This was a friend and a writer named Edward Thomas, also a poet. And what would happen with Edward is they would get to a fork in the road in the woods, and Edward would say, he would have trouble picking out which path he would want to go down. And as soon as they'd pick one, he had this hope that that path would lead to this clearing of the most rare and beautiful, magnificent wildflowers you have ever seen. That's what he hoped for. And sure enough, they'd pick a path and they'd go down, and the clearing and the branches and the trees and all those things it was less than spectacular. And so he always regretted his decision. I should have taken the other road. That's what he thought. Because if I would have picked that road, it would have been so much different. And so this poem, I'm going to read just a part of it, and we'll talk about it. It starts with this. This is the very beginning. It says, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So what you have here is you have one traveler. They come to a fork in the road. They can only take one path. They cannot travel both at the same time. They're one traveler. And they look down one path, and they look as far as they can, and it starts to bend. Bent in the undergrowth, so you can't see any further. They've looked down that whole path, and it looks okay, it looks nice. And then it picks up here, it says, then took the other, so looking down the other path, as just as fair. So this one looks just as fair. They're about equal. And having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. Now, in between the rhyming and the order of the words, you can lose what's happening here, but basically what the author is saying is he's looking down this road. It looks about the same, but maybe, perhaps, it's a little bit better. And perhaps this is calling my name because it is wanting for wear. It's like calling out to him to walk down that path and wear it out. But he says, all things considered, though as for that passing there, had warned them really about the same. Both paths had been traveled about the same. They were indistinguishable. So he has to choose a path. They look similar. They're worn about the same. You got to pick. But the point of this poem is not picking the road right, because you can't really tell the difference, can you? They look the same. Either way that you go, you're probably going to experience some similar things along the way. But the point is not about making a choice. The point is, how do we understand the choice once we actually make it? See, typically when we make a decision, we will choose something and then we'll construct these narratives in our mind to figure out, was that the right choice or not? Here's a simple example. When you go to the grocery store and you decide which line to go in so that it will move faster, it's pretty clear right away. Well, depending on what your goals are, right? It's pretty clear right away whenever you pick a line and you get checked out faster and on your way. Unless you get up to the line and you meet the person at the register, or you're standing next to someone and they say, hey, are you so-and-so? Oh my gosh, I know you. And you make this connection, or someone's struggling with something and you need help, right? Those things do happen. So sometimes our priorities are all messed up, but we construct these narratives in our head to help us understand the decision that we made. That's what the poem's about. So this final line, 2 roads, the verge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. It's an unresolved statement. We don't know if the difference was positive or negative. I took this road and that bettered my life, or I took this road and I really wish I would have taken the other. So it's getting us to question, how do we make peace and sense of the choices and the decisions we make? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to use the story of Esther, talk about how to make decisions. The sermon I've titled, Make Up Your Mind. And we're going to read the story from the book of Esther. I'll be in chapter 4, and I'll put the words on the screen. But before we get there, I just want to kind of catch us up in the story. So last week, we talked about chapter 1 of Esther. If you've not read the book, I encourage you to read the book of Esther. It's a very short, fast read. But in chapter 1, you have Queen Vashti, who refuses to stand before the king when he summons her, and everyone else, because he wants to parade her around for how beautiful she is. She refuses that. Because of that, there was consequences of her decisions. She's dismissed from the king's court, and there's this vacancy. So the king puts out a search for someone in the kingdom to fill Vashti's place, and lo and behold, Esther comes forward. Now, Esther is kind of this mysterious figure. She has hidden a lot from the king. She's very beautiful, but no one knows much about Esther. She's an orphan. Her parents died when she was very, very young. Her cousin, Mordecai, has helped raise her. The other thing about Esther that you should know is she was a practicing Jew. She was a person of the Jewish faith, but she has hidden that from the king. And as she gets taken into the inner courts of the palace, she has to undergo the strict beauty training. So they worry about what she eats and like skincare and all those sorts of things. That's her main role, is to be beautiful before the king. But during that time, she gains favor with a lot of the king's officials and the king himself. One instance, Mordecai, who still keeps in touch with her, they have this kind of informant that goes between them back and forth. And Mordecai finds out that there's a plot to assassinate the king. This is King Xerxes, King Ahasuerus in Hebrew. And he sends someone to tell Esther. And so word gets to Esther, and she gets involved. She tells the king about what's going to happen. And the plot is thwarted. So the king lives, and Esther grows in favor. And she's someone to be trusted, and she is a person that's loyal to the king. Then another character enters. His name is Haman. He is the right-hand man of the king. He is the king's vizier. And his job is to keep order by enforcing the laws. One of the laws that they had is anytime that Haman or other royal officials would enter the city, people would kneel. And so that was happening. Not everyone would do it. Mordecai is one of those who resisted. And so eventually word gets back to Haman that, hey, there's this guy Mordecai out there, and he's refusing to kneel. And Haman says, I have to do something about this. So he develops a plan. His plan is, and it's an awful plan, it's to make an example of Mordecai. And he finds out that he's Jewish. So not only is he going to punish Mordecai, he's going to extinguish everyone in the Jewish faith. He's going to slaughter them. And then he's going to take all their money and put it in the royal treasuries. That's what he tells the king, if you go back and read it. There's really awful stuff here. This is the genocide piece I referred to last week. So because of this plan that's happening, people start to lose their minds. Mordecai is in mourning. He puts on the mourning clothes, traditional mourning clothes, and there's weeping and wailing. And he decides, I got to get Esther involved. Mordecai. So he sends another person to Esther and tells Esther, you have to do something. You have to use your power and your privilege in your place to help save us. And so that's where we pick up in the story. So I'm going to read Esther 4, verses 9 through 11. And we'll talk about that and we'll read some more. So here are these verses. They'll be on the screen. So Hathach, this is the middleman, informant, went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai. So Esther heard everything that Mordecai wanted her to do, and she says this back. All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So what you have here is you have Esther. She is put in a compromising situation. It is dangerous to go before the king. Everyone knows this. This is the king's one law. You can't go and bother the king if he hasn't asked for you. So she's got a choice to make, a fork in the road. And she knows that if she approaches the king without being summoned, she could die. To make matters worse, she actually includes this little detail, that she hasn't been summoned to go before the king in 30 days. So it's been almost a month, and the king has had nothing to do with her. That's not good. That doesn't bode well for what could happen in the future. So she is in turmoil here. She's wondering what she should do, and she tells Mordecai, hey, if I do this, it is dangerous. I could lose my life. Here's what he says back, this verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer, do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? So Mordecai is speaking to her in this position of power and prestige, telling her, imploring her, use your voice. You may have been put in this position by God to do something about it, to save your very people. And if it's not you, it's going to be someone else, but I think you're here for this exact reason. Furthermore, he tells her, hey, if you don't do something about this, you can't hide this secret forever that you're a person of Jewish faith. It's going to catch up with you eventually, and you and your family are going to perish anyway. What do you have to lose? You were made for such a time as this. So this is Esther's crossroads. This is the choice that she has to make, and it's now before her. And what will she do? Will she choose to play it safe? Or will she risk her life for the sake of others? So here's her response to Mordecai. This is chapter 4, verse 15. So then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go gather all the Jews who are in Susa, this is the city that they lived in, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. I think in the end here, Esther really only had one choice after she thought about it for a moment. There are many things that she could have done, could do. There was a lot of possibilities, but I think in the end she knew there was only one choice that she could make. If her people were killed or any harm came to them, how could she live with herself, right? Knowing that she was in a place where she could actually do something about it. So she wanted to save her people, and so she chose and moved very quickly. I think the thing that we sometimes maybe take for granted, though, if we read this story, is we might think that it was easy for her to come to that conclusion. I don't think it was easy for her. We caught a glimpse of her wondering, how should I approach the situation earlier? Right? She told Mordecai, if I go before the king, I could die. And a lot of times when you and I were making decisions that are really, really important for our lives or for our family or for our friends, we are in anguish, and it's hard to know what's right to do. And so we don't get all of those quiet moments here with Esther, but I know that she was struggling here to make a choice. Anybody have struggles making choices from time to time, especially big ones? And then knowing it's going to turn out okay? So Esther, in this story, I think that we can learn from how she arrives to her decision. And so we're going to walk through just kind of, I think, her framework for making a decision. It's not perfect, it's not comprehensive, but it's something. And I think it can help each and every one of us. The thing that Esther did here is she was able to make this choice, and she had no regrets after it. Who would love that? To say, I made my decision with the information I had, and now I'm at peace. Wouldn't that be nice? Whichever path you choose. So here's the first thing that we can do, and that Esther does in the story. We can include God. There's a theological word for this, or a churchy word that we will use, which is called discernment. You've maybe heard that word thrown around in the church world before. And we just got to discern this, you know. It sounds really weird when you think about it, but basically what discernment is you are including God in the decision that you are making. You're inviting God into that process. There's space there where you're approaching God without your mind made up. God, help me, reveal to me the path or the way forward. I'm listening for your voice in all of this. So discernment is really, really essential whenever we make a decision. The thing that Esther does here, though, she does this by fasting. She says, hey, I'm going to fast for 3 days. And connected with that idea of fasting, there's always prayer. This is a spiritual endeavor. She's going to be praying and fasting and including God in her decision. But what she does here is it doesn't just ask for God to help her in the decision-making process and then say, okay, I've got my choice. I know, God, where you're leading me. I'm good. I'll take it from here. She doesn't say that. She makes her choice, and then for 3 days, she continues to pray and fast, and that helps her stay connected to God. Because she stays connected to God, I believe that gives her some extra resolve that she wouldn't have on her own. It gave her the courage to follow through. Who could use some extra follow through from time to time on the decisions that you make? Here's the second thing that she does is she includes others. And we can do that. We can include others in our decision-making process. Now, what we typically do as people, how we're naturally wired, I guess I should speak more for myself, but I think a lot of us, we are naturally wired to ask this question. And we ask it subconsciously because we're always running this through the back of our mind. We're always trying to survive. That's part of our human instinct, is the question of what's in it for me? Right? If I make this choice, how's it going to affect me? You don't want to appear weak, right? You want to appear like you have it all together. So if you make the decision without inviting other people, you can appear as the strong leader. But when you ask others, maybe you come off as indecisive, or maybe you come across as vulnerable. But what you get is you get another perspective. And I call that wisdom. I don't know what you call that, but I call that wisdom, seeking trusted voices in your life to help you. So Esther goes out and she asks for other people to help. And she says, hey, Mordecai, you tell all of the Jews in Susa area, tell them to fast and pray. I'm going to be doing it for 3 days. Would you do it alongside me? Fast and pray for the decision, fast and pray for the outcome that's going to happen. She asked this of her attendants too. So as leaders in our communities and families and organizations, are we listening to the voices that are around us and trying to help us? Are we including others in the decision-making process, or are we just like blazing a trail right over other people? And if someone comes to us and they say, hey, look, I got this thing going on in my life, and it's a really hard decision. Would you pray with me? Would you support me? Do we actually do that? Or do we say, hey, I've got the answers for you. I'll tell you what you need to do. So include others. Esther also, she thinks it through. Any choice that we have to make in life, we can think it through. She understands every single outcome that could happen. She could go before the king and she could die, or maybe it would work out in her favor. That's a high probability. But she makes her choice and based on all of those outcomes. And what she's doing here is she's actually giving up control. I don't know what's going to happen, but if I perish, I perish. She's made peace with that decision. And it's not that she doesn't care about the outcome. She absolutely cares about the outcome. She wants something good for her people. She wants something positive for herself. But she's smart enough to know that it may not work out in her favor. And she's at peace with it. And this is the last one. This is the one that I think kind of is underneath all that she is processing. It's the one idea that drives it all. And we can choose with others in mind. When we have to make a choice, do we put ourselves first or do we put someone else first? And in this story, Esther does the exact opposite. I mean, she does not put herself first. She puts her life on the line for the sake of other people. And she's not the only person to do this in Scripture, by the way. This is a theme that pops up oftentimes when we read the story of God. When you think about the example of Christ and his life, he came to this earth and he said, I did not come to be served. I came to serve. And when Jesus had to face one of the most difficult decisions and he was in the garden in deep anguish, should I go forward with the punishment that is about to become me? It wasn't even a choice for him to endure the pain and the torment on the cross. Jesus did it because he had such great love for us. It was never a decision. It wasn't a choice out of his great love. John 15:13 says this. It says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. We saw that in the example of Jesus. We see that in the story of Esther. And here we are. We're presented with the story of Esther today as we make decisions. And I'm not claiming you have to go die for someone. That's not what I'm claiming. What I am saying, if we're going to serve others, it does come at a bit of a cost to us. And maybe a little part of us might have to die inside to expand the love that we have for other people. This is a story, the story of Esther. A woman made a critical decision in a critical moment in her life. And you and I are here today, and I don't know what decisions you've made that have led you to this place. I don't know what good decisions or even what poor decisions you've made. I don't know how maybe you've been hurt by the choices of someone else. I don't know what damaged relationships you have or what lost opportunities have occurred in your life because someone made a choice. I don't know what path you've gone down and how you wish you would have picked another path. But all of those choices that we've made up to this moment in our lives, they're done. You cannot go back and choose them. They're over with. The most important choice you can make here and now today is the choice that you have in front of you. That's all you can choose. It's the path that you're at now. I believe that you and I were made to love and serve other people. That's what Esther did in the story. That's what Jesus came to do for you and for me. And because of that, it can fuel us and give us the energy to love others. I believe that whatever choice you face when you leave this place, and you're going to face them. I don't know if you're going to be out in your workplace and you're going to have some sort of confrontation and you have to step in. I don't know if you're going to meet someone in the community and they need some help and it's an interruption to your schedule, but you got to go on and do something else. Are you going to be willing to stop and help them even if it delays you for half an hour or maybe an hour? Those are the decisions we face every single day, but I think that you all, me, the church, we were made for such a time as this. Would you pray with me? Holy God, pour out your Spirit upon us today. We just want to draw closer to your Spirit. God, we try so hard to be like you, and we know it's impossible to be Jesus, but would you just fill us up with your love right now? Fill us up with your grace. Forgive us for our past failings and our mistakes and some of the poor choices we have made, God, and just lead us in your love. Let us walk in love. And when we fail, give us that safe resting place. Put your arm around us to get us back on path and on track. Help us be the church together that provides a loving, kind witness to all that we encounter that would point people to you. God, it's all for you and all for your glory. We love you, Lord, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name, and everyone here says, amen.